York,
and the Constitution of the State of New York,
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of the office of Associate Village Justice
and I will faithfully discharge the duties of the office of the
according to the best of my ability.
according to the best of my ability.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Mitch.
I'm sorry.
Well, you missed us like
I'm sorry.
that was fine. You can bring that one up. I do one word at a time. Next up, we have the swearing in of Mark Gilliland and Lawrence Lonke as village trustees for 2-year terms by Village Justice Desmond Lyons. Yeah, I think you're first because you're the senior man. And I'll say You raise your right hand, please. Repeat after me. I, Mark Gilliland,
I, Mark Gilliland,
of the Village of Irvington, County of Westchester,
of the Village of Irvington, County of Westchester,
State of New York,
State of New York,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of New York,
and the Constitution of the State of New York,
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of the office of trustee
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of the office of trustee
according to the best of my ability.
according to the best of my ability.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And one more. Good evening. You raise your right hand, sir, and repeat after me. I, Lawrence Lonke,
I, Lawrence Lonke,
of the Village of Irvington, County of Westchester, State of New York,
of the Village of Irvington, County of Westchester, State of New York,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of New York,
and the Constitution of the State of New York,
and that I will faithfully discharge
and I will faithfully discharge the duties of the office of trustee
according to the best of my ability.
according to the best of my ability.
Now, I think when Larry was originally putting together the agenda, he wanted you all to stay to the end so we could, so we put Kevin's promotion. But we actually have moved it up to now. So I think the chief would like to say a few words before we start with the formalities.
Good evening, everyone. I just want to say a few words regarding Kevin on this nomination to promotion to sergeant, detective sergeant, might add. Detective Kevin Johnson started his police career with the NYPD in 1990. He transferred to Irvington Police Department in summer 1992. While assigned to Patrol Division, Kevin was a very active police officer and was often a top producer in penal law arrests, DWI arrests, and traffic enforcement. During emergency medical technician, a member of the Irvington Police Bike Unit, and he has held the offices of Vice President and President of the Irvington PBA. Kevin has been assigned to the Irvington Police Detective Division and the Greenberg Drug and Alcohol Task Force since 2007. During that time, Kevin and his colleagues, both of Irvington and the task force, have proven to be a valuable asset in the fight against crime here in Irvington and in our neighboring jurisdictions. Kevin and his colleagues have been involved in thousands of investigations, mostly notable, a year-long wire case that yielded over $1.5 million in cash seizures, 22 illegal handguns off the street, and over 20 arrests for both state and federal narcotics trafficking charges. The next was the arrest of 2 men and the subsequent seizure of $350,000 in U.S. currency and 8 pounds of marijuana. There has also been countless narcotics, robbery, and burglaries arrests, which included an Irvington armed robbery on Main Street, where 3 men were arrested, capturing the members of 2 separate organized criminal crews responsible for 4 burglaries in Irvington. And finally, this past April, we had a murder investigation that was also in Sleepy Hollow, Terrytown, and unfortunately we had one here in Irvington, all of which resulted in the arrest of all the perpetrators. So based on Kevin's past performance, I'm happy to have nominated him to be our next detective sergeant. And Mayor, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you.
I guess before I do the official paperwork, I would also like to say a few words. I've known Kevin as long as I can remember, just about. And I always say that Irvington has the finest police department in Westchester and in the state. And what makes that up is not their equipment or their training, it's the people that walk the beat. They get it, they know where they work, they have a true love of not just the job, but of also the community and all the people that come in here as well. And no one epitomizes that better than Kevin. His dedication and his excellence is really sets the standard for everyone, and I know everyone looks to him as a leader, so it's natural to promote him to sergeant today, so congratulations.
Thank you.
So now for the legalese. Resolved to appoint Kevin Johnson to the position of sergeant at an annual salary of $115,519, effective December 3rd, 2018. Subject to probationary period of not less than 12 weeks and not more than 52 weeks. I'll make the motion if I can have a second.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. And now I will swear him in. I don't want to have to do that long sentence at the end. I break that down. All right, raise your right hands. I, Kevin Johnson,
I, Kevin Johnson,
of the Village of Irvington, County of Westchester, State of New York,
of the Village of Irvington, County of Westchester, State of New York,
do solemnly swear the Constitution of the United States
I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of New York,
and the Constitution of the State of New York,
and that I will faithfully discharge
and I will faithfully discharge
the duties of the office of police sergeant,
the duties of the,
office of police sergeant,
office of police sergeant,
according to the best of my ability.
according to the best of my abilities.
Congratulations. This is yours, son. Now, back to the graduation program. Absolutely. Thanks, guys. Thank you very much. Good luck. We're going to see Kevin. Good job. I knew as soon as I took a dig at you, I was going to go back and bite.
All right, you guys, thank you.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, hey, Joel.
Yeah, the mayor's appointment of a deputy mayor. I've had a long-serving deputy mayor, Connie Kehoe, and she's done a fine job, and I hope that she'll do it for another year.
Thank you, Brian, I accept. Hey, what were your expectations?
Resolution to set a schedule for the regular village board meetings. Resolve to hold regular village board meetings on the first and third Mondays of each month of the calendar year, except in July, August, and September, during which months the board will meet on the third Monday. Additionally, the board will hold work sessions on the Wednesday preceding the third Monday each month. Regular business and work sessions begin at 7 p.m. All meetings held in Irvington Village Hall unless otherwise announced.
Second.
All in favor?
Larry, are you going to get these posted on the calendar?
Sorry, the meetings?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Yeah, just waiting for them to be
Officially,
officially approved.
so we can be plugged in.
Yes.
Thanks.
Resolution to adopt an order of business for regular scheduled village board meetings. I guess I'll read this. Resolve to set the order of business for regular scheduled village board meetings as follows. 1, call to order. 2, pledge of allegiance. 3, announcements. 4, correspondence. 5, public comment. 6, consent agenda. 7, public hearings. 8, new business. 9, old business. 10, reports of board, standing committees, officers. 11, public comment. 12, review of action items. 12, adjournment. I'll make a motion if I have a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Thanks.
Resolution to designate an official bank. Brenda, were there any changes here? We added any?
We approved 2 additional ones during the year.
Yeah, so
This
those-
reflects it.
Okay. Resolve to designate JP Morgan Chase, TD Bank, Webster Bank, and People's United Bank as official banks for the deposit of village funds. I'll make a motion if I have a second.
Second.
Resolution to designate official newspapers. Resolve to designate the Gannett Journal News and the Rivertowns Enterprise as official newspapers of the Village of Irvington. I'll make a motion if I have a second.
Second.
All in favor? Resolution to designate an independent auditor. Resolve to designate the firm of PKF O'Connor Davies of Patterson, New York as the official independent auditor for the Village of Irvington. I'll make a motion. Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Approval of purchasing policy. Brenda, do you want to go over any of these changes?
Sure, we've increased the minimum for purchases of goods and services from $250 to $300. This reflects inflation and more smaller purchasing that doesn't require to go through the treasurer's office. We've also changed the requirement for verbal quotes from 1,500 to 3,000, and the written quotes from 3,000 to 5,000. Extend those thresholds for public works for some time, so public works and non-public work purchases. That's the only change we have on here. It's just bringing in line the requirements for going to bid versus verbal quotes and then written quotes.
Any questions on this? Otherwise, resolve to approve the purchasing policy dated December 3rd, 2018. I'll make the motion. Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Approval of an investment policy. Slight changes here as well.
A little bit here. We've increased the thresholds, that's the only real difference here, by bank, all right? So it's reflecting monies that we have with different banks, and we've increased it because of the higher yield we're able to get. And other banks want to have enough of a threshold so we can do investing when we see a better rate. And then it's to increase also the amount we can have. This needs to follow the practice. So when we collect money in our prime, top tax collection months, December and June, we have more money in one particular bank, that's JP Morgan Chase. So it increases in temporary raise from 14,000 to 16,000 due to seasonal collection of taxes.
The only question I had was Sterling National and the Westchester Bank weren't in the...
I think we need to fix that. I thought they were, right.
Okay. Do we need to add those?
I think we do need to add those.
So do you want me to go back and change the resolution?
Yes, please.
Okay. Resolve to designate JP Morgan Chase, TD Bank, Webster Bank, People's United Bank, Sterling National Bank, and the Westchester Bank as official banks for the deposit of village funds. I'll make a motion if I have a second. All in favor?
Those are the only changes then on this.
Okay. Anyone have any questions on that? Otherwise, resolve to approve the investment policy. Motion, can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Resolution to set the date of the next organizational meeting. Nothing like looking ahead. Resolve to set the date of the next organizational meeting is December 2nd, 2019. I'll make a motion, can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Who knows?
Exactly. Volunteer appointments. Larry says he thinks it'd be a good practice if I read all of them.
Just for the record, I never said that. There's a revised list on the dais there, just there was a couple of corrections. Right.
Yeah, did you guys get your revised copy? Minor changes?
Oh, yeah, oh, it's a
There's also
chart.
something we could
Yes.
tweak as we
Got
get.
it. Oh, wait, where's Pepper? Here's the new one.
Yeah, should have been on the,
15, this is the count.
yeah, this was the first change. So,
Oh,
yeah, that's good.
I didn't really look
We
at
did
this
look at
ahead
it.
of
We
time.
can look at it all carefully. We can always change it. But resolve to appoint the following volunteer committee members as detailed in the revised appointment schedule. I'll make a motion if I can have a second.
Second.
All in favor?
All right.
Trustee liaison assignments. I'll just print this off. So again, I think we briefly spoke about these today, but I will read them off, and if anyone, it just jogs anyone's memory and you're appalled. So the county has Farmers Market, Chamber of Commerce.
Not farmer's market.
Oh, that must have been changed after last.
Yeah, so, that's why we even had the email about it
Informally
today.
changed.
Not that I don't like the farmer's market, I love the
Farmers
farmer's
Market,
market.
Larry has the Farmers Market, County has the Chamber of Commerce, Tourism, DPW, and Water, and the Irvington Town Hall Theater. Mark has the ARB.
And anything left over with historic,
But there's still things that happen with it.
Right, yeah, right, so
You're the
kind of-
go-to on that as well. Mark has the ARB, the Building Department with Planning and ZBA, Open Space Advisory Committee, Traffic Calming Committee, Tree Commission. Janice has the Courts, School Board, Library, Fire, Green Policy Task Force, and the Police.
no.
That was the trade, yeah.
That was the trade.
Yeah, it should be in my list now.
It is now.
I have fire and police.
Yep. And Larry has, in addition to the Farmers Market, Housing Committee, Recreation and Parks, Irvington Woods, Nature Center and Trails, Face Committee, and CAV. Okay?
Could you send that corrected list around?
Yes.
Just so we-
Yeah, we'll do that.
You have corrections?
And change it on the website.
Yep.
you get the right emails.
Announcements. Checks over $25,000. The first one, or actually the only one, is Armor Tight Construction Corp., which is the Irvington Firehouse Roof Replacement Project. The amount of $67,230, which came out of the capital budget performance bond. This is a partial payment, but we're glad that that work's finally getting done. Yes. Next, I will make a motion to have a public hearing to consider, actually after we do describe it, but a public hearing to consider a local law amending the sewers chapter of the village code to require compliance with county approved plans. That's scheduled for December 17th, 2018 at 7 p.m. at Village Hall. Did you want to give a couple words on that?
I can do that.
Yeah.
In connection with the sewer extension that's going up on Herman's Road, Westchester County said it required something formal in the village's regulations that say that the sewer main has to be constructed in strict compliance with the plans and specs approved by the Westchester County Department of Health. We've always done anyway, but they just wanted it in the law. So this amends the section of the law that deals with how they're to be constructed. And right now it says that they have to be constructed in accordance with the regulations of the village. This adds County of Westchester, New York State, and shall be constructed and installed in strict accordance with approved by the Westchester County Department of Health. And they're also, when I was fixing this up, I noticed in the law, it said that they're also supposed to follow procedures set forth in this Water Pollution Control Federation manual, which I looked up, which as last printing was 1970, I think it was maybe 1990. So I did check with our engineers whether anybody heard that or whether they're still, so we struck that. I don't think you'd want to be done in compliance position, no manual, so that's what that does.
Great. So I'll make a motion to have the public hearing. Do I get a second? Second. All in favor? Next announcement I have is, I guess this was a big weekend in the village. We had the holiday happening on Saturday, but even before that happened, the beautification committee, I think, went above and beyond this year. They did up Town Hall really nicely, which was a great addition, as well as the wreaths around town. My understanding is there's 6 natural wreaths or 6 fake. I guess we won't even say. We have to go and try to find them.
No, I think the majority are natural.
So there's 6
The
artificial.
minority is.
So anyway, I looked and I didn't notice any big difference. So so they beautified all of downtown, but I thought that it looked especially nice this year. So we want to really thank them as they really kicked off the holiday happening well in advance with all their hard work. I'll thank the Holiday Happening Committee, which is so many different groups that have all come together, from the PTSA to there's so many others. I
Rivertown's Chamber.
was just going to say, personal or special thanks to Nick Campbell from the Rivertown's Chamber of Commerce, who spearheaded their efforts as well. Did a great job. I want to thank the Main Street School Singers under the direction of Megan Hannon, who there were 60 singers. We actually was changing the whole program because they can't fit into the rec center anymore. So we now have it in front of Town Hall. And then lastly, the volunteer fire department, which always gives out, hot chocolate and cookies and things like that.
Could I add two things to that? There were for the Tiffany Reading Room during the day, and I was there for a little while, and there was a theater performance going on right above our heads, which was very exciting. the 101 Dalmatians that you could hear, which was a fun kind of piece of it. And then the Historical Society was overrun with people and kids looking at the train. The train, you have to go, bring your grandkids. The train in the basement has Little Main Street of Irvington running down the middle, and the train going around. It's just
I heard it's amazing. I have to check it out.
just precious. Anyway,
And when is that going to be open again soon?
it's going to be open again soon.
Every Thursday and Saturday
I'll check it out.
through January.
Perfect.
The middle of January.
Okay, great.
Beautiful.
Will Bill be dressed up every?
I'm not so sure about that.
Maybe if you give him enough advance notice. And then lastly, my last thank the river towns for their menorah lighting to kick off Hanukkah last night. So it was a big turnout in town. So we kind of had 2 days of holiday happening, and I wanted to thank them for including Irvington in that. Anyone else have any announcements? Otherwise, I'll move on to correspondence. We have one piece of correspondence from Gloria Leahy. Dear Mayor Smith, the Village of Irvington trustees, we attended the Route 9 Active Transportation Conceptual Design Plan presentation last Saturday at Mercy College. We encourage you all to support this initiative. My husband and I moved to the co-op apartment in Irvington on Broadway near Sunnyside from the East Village in August 2017, and we gave birth to a baby boy in December 2017. We love Irvington's proximity to NYC, beautiful scenery, the wonderful programs for children, the lovely parks of the downtown area. What really appealed to us about moving here from the city was the ability to walk to the Irvington train station and Main Street. After hearing about the Route 9 Active Transportation Conceptual Design Plan and the possibility that Broadway might have sidewalks on both sides of the and I are both so excited. There's no sidewalk in front of our building, so when we cross the street, we have to cross 4 lanes of traffic on Broadway to reach the sidewalk on the other side. If there was a sidewalk on both sides of the road, we would feel so much safer. Also, we think that the proposed improvements would help us appeal to buyers like us, young families relocating from the city, once we decide to sell the apartment. We urge you to take a look at the report and help make this plan a reality. Thank you. Regards, Gloria and Tim Leahy. Thank you for that. Next up, we have public comment. Anything not on the agenda? Nobody? If not, I'll move on to the consent agenda. It's just the minutes of the regular meeting. Anyone have any questions or comments on that? Otherwise, I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda. If I can get a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Now I'll make a motion to open the public hearing and consider a local law to permit the adaptive reuse of public buildings by special permit. If I can get a second. All in favor? Take it over to you, Mary Ann.
You want me to go through it? Yeah. Oh, thank you for not saying 30 seconds.
No. What time do you want?
Okay, but this law implements specific recommendations of the comprehensive plan update. And it amends the zoning code to permit by special permit adaptive reuse of historic buildings. As I'm going along, there's a couple of typos in here I'm going to point out. They're really marginal, really minimal. But the opening paragraph talks about revising the V&T law. It's actually revising the zoning law. It was just it came from the town, so I guess heard that happen. Then the first section of it adds to the list of uses in the one-family districts the adaptive reuse of historic buildings. Let me tell you what section 224.8 does is lists all the uses permitted in the one-family district. A is single-family houses. accessory uses. C right now is some use on a property that doesn't exist in the village, so we struck that. We're using C to plug this one in. I'll get back to the details of it. And then D are special permit uses, where the special permit is issued by the planning board. This one, the special permit would be issued by the Board of Trustees. Now read the provision. Subject to the issuance of a special permit by the Board of Trustees in accordance with sections 224, and it should be 8E and F, not just 224E and F, 224-8E and F. A building designated on the National Register of Historic Places or designated as a local landmark by the Village of Irvington may be used as an historical, educational, and/or cultural facility, including but not limited to tours, meeting rooms, classrooms, exhibition and archival space, gift shop space, kitchen facilities, and office space accessory to the historic, educational, and/or cultural use. Such use may be in addition to a permitted residential use. Now, right now, these are the uses permitted in the one family, and I'll get to later sections that make it apply in other districts. Okay. Again, this is a special permit issued by the Board of Trustees. Then the next section, section E, is the considerations in granting special permits. That was changed in a few ways. I'll go through the details, but it was changed to, right now it's written as if the planning board is the only one that issues a special permit. So it was changed to the planning board and the Board of Trustees. They'll both have the same set of considerations. It updates the provisions, eliminates a couple of unnecessary provisions, and adds a provision about parking. So where it says the planning board, now it says reviewing board. The reviewing board would be either the planning board or the Board of Trustees. The requirement about the use of premises not causing injury offense was stricken because it's more precisely covered by C, that the proposed use has to be of such location, size, and character that it'll be in harmony with the existing and future development of the district in which it's proposed to be situated and won't be detrimental to the development or use of adjacent properties. So that's covered there. It didn't need to be there as well, and that's better in English. It's updated to say that it has to comply with the New York State Uniform Fire Prevention and Building Code. It would anyway, but it's just clarifying in the law. And we added, a provision was added that adequate off-street parking must be provided for the size and type of activity proposed. Parking may be provided on-site or on abutting or reasonably nearby site. Now, the Board of Trustees, or if it's a planning board, will determine whether there's adequate parking. It's not saying, 6 parking spaces for this, because it's going to depend. It's going to depend on what the use is, how frequent the use is, and how many people might be expected. Right. Okay. Then Section 3 of the law, which is Section F of the code provision, is the procedure for the consideration of special permits. And you'll see a bunch of stuff stricken. It doesn't mean that they're not going to do that. It's that stuff, the standards. For some reason, it was in the procedure section, and that's already covered in E, the section I read before. So it eliminates provisions that are repetitive of those standards. And so this focuses only on the process, and it updates the procedure in several respects. Again, it has the Board of Trustees as a reviewing board. This is a new provision that every application has to include a detailed description of the proposed use, including days and hours of operation, the number of people who are expected to visit the site at various times, and the number of people, if any, who will reside at the site. This provision is also added that the reviewing board may require the applicant to provide a parking study demonstrating the parking demand for the proposed use based on data from the Institute of Traffic Engineers, field data from similar uses, and other appropriate source material. These are just non-changes in the law, but corrections I would make in paragraph 5, that it just says the board, and it should say the reviewing board in a couple of those spots, so that would be added. That's number 6. then the public hearing is pretty much the same, except the provision was added that you have to erect a sign on facing the property, facing the public street. And it has to be there 10 days immediately preceding. Right now, that requirement exists for any site plan approvals or zoning board, but it seemed that it was appropriate that it should apply to special permits as well, so that's added there. And that's all really that's changed on procedure. You see some other changes there, but they're just language tweaks. Then in the provision on revocation of special permits, right now the law reads that the only basis for revoking special permits is that the property taxes aren't paid. I guess it could not be renewed, but this adds that it can also be revoked if it determines the special permit are violated. Basically, the village control over that. And then it's got the procedure for it. The procedure is the same as for not paying taxes, but it just broadens the grounds for revoking. Okay. So that's the heart of the changes. It's repeated then or referred to in other sections. Then section 3 of the law, which is on page 8, remember I said that use was permitted in the one-family district. Now, so we had to change the use regulations for the multifamily district as well, so it would be permitted there. It's also permitted in two-family districts, but we didn't have to change the law because the law right now reads any use permit, what's permitted in the two-family district is any use permitted in the one-family district. So it cascades in there. Okay, so section 3 permits the use in multifamily districts. Section 4 permits it in business district. And section 6 permits it in the waterfront district. And I know this looks like it's not permitted, but that's because the section listing, you don't have the whole section listing the regulations of the waterfront district. It says in the waterfront district, any use is permitted except, and it lays out a couple of them. And one of them says, except use is permitted in the multifamily residential district. So if we said, let that in there, then it would be except for the adaptive reuse. So then we had to make an exception to that exception. So it's pretty awkward, but, and I know, Janice, you want to simplify.
I know.
It would not simplify.
There was no easy fix there.
No,
I got it.
No, just got to be that way. Fortunately, at the moment, there aren't any designated buildings in the waterfront district. So, again, this only applies, you can only get this use, special permit use, would only apply to buildings that are either on the National Register of Historic Places or local landmarks designated by Irvington. There aren't any yet. The local landmark law is pretty new, but there could be. And it's got to be by special permit issued by the planning board. It has to be officed. Okay, I think as a, Connie, you raised a bunch of issues.
You answered, really, thank you. You and Larry answered some of my confusion about some of the confusion that both Janice was wondering how we could make it clearer, and I agree, but it's fine as long as you explain it. And the other thing.
It's somewhat clearer if you look at the statute in the statute book.
And the other part was just in the beginning, be it enacted by the Board of Trustees, the Village of Irvington, the Chapter 213, Vehicle and Traffic. It's not vehicle and traffic. Right, that's another typo that we just, I don't think we told the public that we knew that was a typo.
No, she mentioned it.
Oh, okay, I was, and you said that, maybe I'm just looking at this wrong, Mary Ann, and just fine, I'm not a lawyer, but when I was looking through on page 8, and there's page 7 at the bottom, it has letter G, and that had changes in it.
Right.
So I thought that you meant to include it up there, 224-8, and you added the 8, E, F, and G, because there are changes in G.
No.
That's not the same G?
No, The references to E and F,
Right.
it says, in accordance with E and F, this is how you issue the permit. And the two sections that deal with issuance of the permit are E and F. E are the standards, and F contains the procedures.
Okay.
G is revocation, so you're not issuing it in connection with the
So even though there are changes, you don't need to mention it in the first paragraph?
No,
Okay,
no.
all right. Like I said.
Yeah, no, it's,
And other than that, you know, I think you made it clear that this references back to the local landmark law that we passed. I just looked, you know, we passed it in January 18th, 2018. So these two work together. And, you know, we can talk about that if anybody has a question about it, I'm sure.
it might be an incentive for a
Yes.
property owner to want to have their house declared a local landmark. But understand, just because you're a local landmark, a landmark, even designated, you don't automatically get the special
Right.
permit. You have to convince the, demonstrate to the Board of Trustees that it won't be detrimental to the neighborhood and to the
Right.
character of the building.
Yeah, and I think it clarified also that it is, for this special permit, it's our board of trustees. The planning board does a lot of special permits, but not this one.
Right, they do the special permits for museums, for educational institutions, you know, for schools. They do give the special permit for Mercy.
Right, so that's, again, if you have to read it a few times as a non-lawyer to follow it, but I got it.
Yeah, it's really, you need, if you look at the whole statute, it's clearer, you'll see. A, or, you know, your basic one-family uses, B, accessory uses, C, special permit uses where it's issued by the Board of Trustees, and D, special permits that are granted by the planning board.
And if people are remembering the local landmark discussion, this comes out of the owner. The owner wants this local landmark designation, and that's the beginning of the whole process of being a local landmark, of applying to be a local landmark. The emphasis, the initiation comes from the owner of that property. So, I mean, it's easy enough to go back and read that whole law, but they are definitely working together if this one is to pass, in my opinion. So thank you.
Would it make any kind of sense to require that any building that wants to have an adaptive reuse be designated a local landmark, even if it's on the National Register, or is that just making it too confusing?
What do you mean?
So if there's a building listed on the National Register, it would be pretty much pro forma, but we also want to designate that building as a local landmark in order to apply this local, I'm not sure if it's a...
It's an interesting thought.
I'm
It's an interesting thought. I'll think about it a little bit.
I'm not sure what would be added by that, just by the very fact that it's on the National Register, there's an enormous number of limits put on it.
It'd be hard to decline it if someone, applied. It's not locally historical.
And I think we have to check, but I think part of the local landmark law automatically incorporated national
All right,
landmarks.
I can look at it right here. I got it.
So they're automatically incorporated anyway?
As I recall.
Yeah.
I'll read it. I got it here
It's a
for
year.
you. I'm sure Marion has it.
Okay, well, we can get back to
Yeah.
that point. I'll double check it.
Anyone else on the board have comments on this? Mark's wheels are turning, I can tell.
I'm just rereading the revocation clauses. Is there something that...
So I can't hear you.
Oh, I just said I was rereading a couple of the clauses in here. I don't have anything to say yet, maybe.
Oh,
Okay. Anyone else up here, otherwise I can...
I'd like to hear, what the public has to say, and I certainly have a point of view on it.
Yeah, we did receive, before I open it up, we received one piece of correspondence from Martin and Meredith Dolan. Larry, thank you for inviting comments on the potential legislation regarding historic homes and museum open house historical visit options. In general, without having the expertise to comment on the specific wording of the law, we are in favor of this initiative as it could potentially enable another option to share the benefits of such historic homes with the local and broader communities. As background, Villa-Nuit is one of about 2,000 homes recognized by the Department of the Interior and supervises the National Trust for Historic Preservation as being of special historical significance in the United States. Built in 1852, it is one of Irvington's gems. We are grateful to see the village take steps to try to facilitate uses which may benefit the community's access, as well as help the owner alleviate somewhat the costs involved in owning and maintaining such historic homes. Such a law would also create more transparency and could therefore reduce questions which may arise from unregulated uses, even well attended along those lines. It's worth noting in the fact that in the case of Villa-Nuit, and oftentimes with houses designated as historic, the National Trust requires that the villa be open to visitation and available to be seen for the benefit of the public from time to time. It is our view, having this access codified and regulated locally would be a benefit, since it would put local organization and structure into what is now an ad hoc national requirement, with this new oversight potentially reducing concerns. And of course, we welcome every chance to share Villa-Nuit with the local community. Yours sincerely, Martin and Meredith Gilmore.
Brian, on the local, I have the local landmark login. No, it's not automatically. If you're a local landmark, it has to be designated by the village. But there's several criteria and sort of an automatic criteria is if you're criterion is if you're on the National Register. So if you apply, you automatically get to be.
But you still have to apply.
Yes.
Okay, I'll open it up, public comment. In the back, he was the first hand up. He put his hand before he stood.
The only hand up.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Board of Trustees, members of the public. My name is Joel Sachs. I'm an attorney in White Plains, New York, with a law firm of Keene & Bean. And we have a client who recently purchased the Villa Luero property at 67 North Broadway. And first thing I want to say is we're very pleased that the village board and Mary Ann and Larry have been working on what I think is a very innovative zoning amendment, because there are too many of these older historic buildings and mansions throughout the state, especially along the Hudson River corridor, that are very limited in what uses can be made of those buildings. And they sit there, and unfortunately, a lot of them are really kind of like white elephants. So this, again, which I think is a very innovative law, would allow a whole plethora of uses for those buildings, subject to meeting the special permit requirements of the Board of Trustees as set forth in the local law. Now, we had a meeting a few weeks ago where the mayor and Larry and Mary Ann met the purchaser of Villa Luero. His name is Rich Dennis, and he was asked by Larry to come to the next board meeting, I think on December 17, Larry, and kind of give his vision as to what uses are being proposed for the Villa Luero property. And I think we're very pleased, and I think you'll see when you hear from Mr. Dennis, that virtually everything he's proposing would fit within the four corners of the zoning amendment that's being proposed for adaptive reuse of these buildings. So again, you know, we would urge the board strongly to consider adopting this very innovative zoning amendment. There's one little legal issue I've discussed a couple of times with Mary Ann. Right now, the planning board has jurisdiction on issuing special permits for schools, museums, libraries, and art galleries. Those are very specific type of uses. And the new zoning amendment allows adaptive reuse of historic buildings for educational, cultural, or historical purposes. And the only concern I have is that we don't want to have a situation where we have to go before both the planning board for a special permit and before the board of trustees. So, and again, I discussed this a couple of times with Mary Ann. I don't think it'll be a problem, but I just wanted to bring that to your attention, that there could be certain uses that the planning board now has jurisdiction over, which are very specific uses, which could fall into the more general category as historic, cultural, or educational uses. That's the only thing I wanted to say.
I'll just, in my own curiosity, was your client aware of the comprehensive plan update before he bought the property?
I was aware of it, and I had discussed the concept with the client.
So I'm always curious about that, or if it was just happenstance.
Right, yeah. Yeah, and Mary Ann had discussed it with me, of course.
Great.
Seems like we worked on that comprehensive plan for, I don't know, quite a long time. Was it a year?
It was
A year.
9 or 10 months, maybe. Yeah, a
Well,
little less than a year. Right. A lot of meetings.
Interesting. Well, at least I'm glad someone was looking at it.
Okay, all right.
So, Marion, did you have any comment about the potential overlap?
Yeah, I mean, I think if somebody came in and they say, we want to use this as a museum, then it's, but I would think that a more hybrid use would fit in under this. It's also more specific, and if I had to rule what section it came in, I say under this thing. And there's also a lot more regulation under this provision than there is under the, like, right now, well, I guess these standards apply to both of them, so it would be the same. Because the standards for museums, the specific standards for museums don't make a lot of sense. It talks about setbacks and coverage, which make absolutely no sense if you're talking about existing buildings. But as I read it, I don't see an issue.
Okay.
Yeah, who interprets that? Is it something that you would be the ultimate?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's pretty clear, but if it's not to Joe, well, maybe it's not.
Well, no,
But,
well.
I have a lot of respect for Joe, but I think, I don't see the issue.
Okay.
I don't see an ambiguity there.
I guess the one thing that just, I'm not a legal eagle here, but it seems like the other one is coming, this is coming from a stance of changing the use of a residence to include another usage, whereas the other one always sounded to me more like coming in and trying to propose a use for the entire zone that's, exclusive of a residential.
It actually specifically said you couldn't live in it if it was a museum, right?
Right, exactly. So I would see those as two, that's pretty clearly exclusionary. It depends on what your motive is for the museum in this sense.
Yeah, and also it's very specific that it's adaptive reuse of a designated building.
Exactly, right, as opposed to a new building
Right.
trying to get authorized.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, like, so Mercy could never come in under this, but I could imagine a situation where a building might come in, might decide to apply to be a museum, just a museum. I guess you could come in under there, you could make that argument, but you would never have review by the planning board and the board of trustees unless there was a change to the building. Then, of course, the planning board would have to review it for site plan review, but I don't think you could change the building anyway, probably under the national designation.
Right.
But if there were, of course, that would have to go before the planning board, but it's going to the planning board, not for the use, but for any construction that's being done.
Right, right. And again, I just wanted to say again, I hope the board realizes what a cutting-edge zoning amendment this is, because I've been teaching land use and environmental laws and adjunct at Pace Law School for over 30 years, and I have never come across an amendment such as this that is focused specifically on adaptive reuse of historic buildings. I think it's a...
Well, I think it's hats off to Mary Ann for coming up with the legislation. I
That's
think
what I was
also
going to
hats
say.
off to the committees from the comprehensive plan that saw that as a need. And we don't want to have a bunch of white elephants that decline and then eventually have a fire or have to be demolished. So I think that was something that was important to the comprehensive plan right away. And I think Mary Ann was fairly creative and visionary in coming up with something.
More than fairly, highly.
Thank you.
I didn't want to say too much.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And again, we'll be here, Mr. Mayor, with our client,
Great.
then
So
in
that
2 weeks.
confirmed that December
Right,
17th date?
right, if that date is still good for the board, very good.
That's-
Okay,
that's
thank
great.
you.
Okay. So just to finish the issue of museum, I take what you said about it's probably not necessary. And would there be any reason, or would it make any sense just to move the word museum, take it out of the planning board's, domain and move it over here?
No, because maybe somebody a building that's not a national historic landmark wants to be a museum. Somebody wants to open an American Girls Museum in some house in the village.
But if it were, I'm sorry, if it were a residence and a museum, it would fit more like what we're describing in this new law, wouldn't it? Somebody who wants to
But
live
at the
there,
moment, we're only doing it for national landmarks.
or local,
And,
or local
Yeah.
landmarks, as they may come about.
right?
So if somebody is, living in a home here and wants to continue to live in it, but what they define there, and they apply to be a local landmark, and that's agreed, yes, you are a local landmark, and their desire is to continue to live there, but have a museum, not exactly what we've described. Wouldn't that be a case that would?
Well, no, I can think of a
Yeah.
situation where you could, but on the other hand, there might be somebody who's not, they don't want to be a landmark, they just want to be a museum. They want to be a museum, a Facebook museum. No, or something like that, that's not,
You're trying to find
I
a
mean,
lease
I
or something?
kind of doubt it, but the use is there,
Okay,
and
I mean,
then
I
you should
just-
be
I
able,
just laying it
that
out.
would be like a huge change in the law, because right now you could have a museum anywhere in the one-family districts, and then you're saying you can only have a museum in an adaptively reused house.
It would be limited, more
have a
limiting.
carburetor museum in your garage without looking for historic designation.
Exactly.
Okay.
So you could have a museum jointly with residential in the existing.
No, but you can't.
No, you
See, so that's why I brought it up. If
Yeah, no,
if
you
were
could, but
that
I'm not
case.
talking about somebody living in the house. They got the house and they decide, I don't want this anymore, I got another house, I'm gonna turn this one into,
So we use Janice's idea, the carburetor museum in the garage would take over the entire house.
I don't even know what a carburetor
yeah,
Okay,
whatever kind you want.
Right. I'm not terribly worried about this. I was just, when
Yeah.
it came up, I just want to play out
Yeah,
what
no,
what
I mean,
thinking
it's
you might
great
have.
to do that,
And
but I don't think that would be a good idea. It would be a big change. A big change in the law.
Okay.
Could we talk about section G for just a second? Because
oh, that was what I brought up, section G.
No, but he's.
A different section.
Substance.
yeah, now is this applicable to any kind of special permit, right? I mean, this is, I guess what I'm asking is, I never knew that if there was I have 2 points or questions or just comments. I didn't realize the Board of Trustees was always the final backstop on a revocation,
That's how it is now.
because we've never seen one, right? Have you?
Yeah. Yeah, we don't have there aren't that many special permits in the village. We've got I imagine a whole lot of them are taxpayers. Because of churches and school,
Yeah,
That was
education.
the only way to get rid of it, was if they didn't pay their taxes, and they don't have to pay
Yeah,
taxes.
yeah, but you could have a profit-making museum.
But in the case of, you could have, then the italicized that the terms of the special permit have been violated, so that's new language.
Yes, that's new.
So that could apply to an educational or religious institution, I suppose, if they had some very specific,
Yeah.
I'm thinking like the Mercy Gate issue,
Yeah.
the one that got people upset often in the
Right.
past. So, but who would bring that notification of violation? Would that come from the building department, or is that just however it's notified? We don't care. I'm just wondering the
You know what?
reality of it.
Mark, I didn't change the revocation law, other than to say it could also be revoked for violating the terms of the special
Yeah, that's
permit.
not what I'm getting at. I'm just trying to think conceptually about what's the process in the village, because I've never seen this come forward, so.
Yeah, we haven't either. But it does have, it says the notification, let's say a bunch of neighbors complain that, hey, listen, this was one of the terms of the special permit, and it's being violated regularly, they would make a complaint to the building inspector or to Larry, whatever, and then the village would have to give them notice of the delinquencies, they've got a time to cure.
Yeah.
And then if not, they have a hearing.
Okay.
So that's really the main, but it's not happening now, it just comes up at renewal, really, when people
That's
talk about.
that's all I've seen.
Right, because I guess.
That's the big change. That
Well,
it
because
is,
to me, this little sentence, this little clause adds the ability to do something,
Yes.
to threaten something in the middle without having to wait 5 years or whatever.
Right. Or I think right now it's being done, I'm not sure, but I think there could be something in the conditions of the.
Right,
of the
exactly, you'd have to
special
write it
permit.
in specifically.
You could
right.
write it in.
Okay, thank you.
This, yeah, and that's another way to deal with it, but this is a better way to
Yeah,
deal
like
with
Mercy
it.
had
This
that they
will-
didn't give their, data, their traffic data or whatever.
Right.
So I think that would have to be written into the special permit.
So I think it's better this way, because this way, all your due process requirements are there, of notice, and time to cure, a public hearing, and
Right.
so it's better to do it this way.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
anyone else on the board? Otherwise, come on up. You were second.
Pat Ryan, President of the Irvington Historical Society, and I'd just like to read this letter on behalf of the Society. Dear Mayor Smith and members of the Village Board of Trustees, the members of the Board of Trustees of the Irvington Historical Society reviewed the proposed amendment to the zoning code to permit adaptive reuse of historic buildings by special permit at our most recent board meeting. Overall, there was strong support for the amendment. The preservation of our historic buildings is critical to maintaining the cultural identity and architectural heritage of the village. Many of these significant structures are not only important in themselves, but they also speak to the history of the village and its people. All of us are aware of the financial burden that maintaining these stately structures often represents for the individual property owner. In many cases, their very size makes them economically impractical. Exploring and supporting the types of historical, cultural, and educational uses described in the proposed amendment would provide not just some financial relief for the owners, but more importantly, would integrate these buildings more fully into the life of the village. Treating historic buildings as renewable resources while transforming them into accessible, usable places is a good conservation practice, and the longer-term sustainability of a building will be enhanced through adaptive reuse. Adoption of the proposed amendment is consistent with the comprehensive plan, goals, and recommendations of preserving and enhancing the historic character of the village. Although there was some discussion around specific pieces of the legislation, such as terms and definitions, and I think actually Mary Ann answered a number of those this evening, the board felt that the special permit process put forth was both fair to the homeowner and sufficiently comprehensive to ensure the rights of nearby property owners. In fact, it was felt that the very existence of a process was a significant step in safeguarding those rights. Board members of the Society would like to thank the village administration, the mayor, and the village trustees for their ongoing interest in historic preservation and their willingness to explore creative approaches that will ensure Irvington's historical, architectural, and cultural heritage and preserve the special historic character of the village. Thank you.
Sounds good, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very good.
Brandon.
I got it. I'll take care of it.
Would you like to be next?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, trustees, and attendees. I'm Joe Lombardi, the owner of the Armisteiner Octagon House at 45 West Clinton Avenue, and have been for the past 40 years. Historic landmark, meaning that at its designation was one of less than 1,000 nationally significant historic places, not just homes, but places, designated by the Secretary of Interior as having exceptional qualities in illustrating the heritage of the United States. I wish to offer my strong support for the 2018 Comprehensive Plan update, specifically the enactment of Section 224.8, which would allow historical, educational, and/or cultural uses in homes like mine. Permitting owners to use their homes for the stated purposes will reinforce, for sure, the heritage of the village of Irvington. In recent years, the cost of ownership of historic homes has increased out of proportion with traditional home ownership, causing substantial financial burden for property owners. The burdens typically are significantly more maintenance. They were built at a time when labor was inexpensive. Taxes, they are often on large parcels with tax assessments based upon subdivision value, and insurance, replacement costs are prohibitive, all of which endanger their continuing existence. The amendment of the Irvington Code to permit adaptive reuse of historic buildings, subject to the issuance of a special permit, would reduce the possibility of loss of our village's precious historic heritage, while assisting property owners in managing the financial hardship of perpetuating historic resources. John Ruskin spoke perfectly about houses like the Octagon House. Old houses are not ours. They belong partly to those who built them and partly to the generations of mankind who are to follow. Irvington, by enacting this amendment, would be joining municipalities throughout the world who assist owners in their efforts to pass their historical resources to future generations. The village should be applauded for their forward-looking efforts to facilitate preserving its precious built environment. During the coming centuries, future Irvington residents will look back to these efforts with gratitude. Thank you.
Thank you.
Give a copy of the letter.
I can send you a copy. I'd like to do that.
Who would like to follow that letter?
Please.
Hi, Board. My name is Nicholas Moore, and I live at 9 Hancock Place, and I'm also the president of APOA. I'm going to cede most of my time to Kristen, but in general, this APOA believes that this is good law, this is good legislation. We, as expressed by our members during our annual meeting, just want to make sure that we go ahead and tune some of the areas of the law, of the ordinance, to go ahead and benefit the surrounding neighbors, the homeowners who may object in concept to expansive rights in a residential area. So we want to be specific before we've gone ahead and gotten down into the specific law, into the specific language of the legislation. And this board has found it helpful. We hope that you will go ahead and receive our comments the same way tonight. And without ado, why don't I go ahead and turn it over to Kristen.
I can email it as well.
That's fine, no, we can circulate it around.
Good evening, I'm Kristen Wilson from Blanchard and Wilson here with Nicholas representing APOA. In my letter that I just handed in, it's more of a little brief. There are 8 or 9 points. I won't go through every detail, but there are a couple questions we have and clarifications perhaps that the board already can clarify for us, or just thoughts that we would like to leave with you prior to you formalizing any final law. First, I will reiterate a little bit what Nicholas said. It doesn't go so much towards the proposed legislation, which is very well written, but we are continuing to have issues with Villa Nuits. If you look on the social media calendars, they have the next 15 days in December booked for weddings, bar mitzvahs, and the like. One of the most recent comments from one of the guests for a 30th birthday party was, "It fit at least 28 guests comfortably overnight, could have been more." So those types of engagements are continuous. There is absolutely no enforcement, and we are imploring this board, through your building department, to almost have a no-tolerance policy so that the existing uses that are in the code are enforced and complied with. So taking that kind of background, we are concerned that should legislation go into effect that would expand the special permitted uses for this type of property, that there be some very specific enforcement mechanisms. It's great that there's revocation kind of midterm if there's any condition that's violated. But what about language, and this is all detailed in my letter, what about language requiring that any applicant, before they can apply, is compliant with all of the zoning codes, has all the building permits, C of Os, everything, taxes paid, but that they come to you on a clean slate? I think that would go a long way. Also, perhaps if there is a midterm revocation, maybe it needs to be 30 to 90 days, that if they violate any condition, they come before you. There has to be due process, yes, but sometimes violations occur and then they're over with. There's no need for a notice to cure policy. I mean, so if it's really noisy for 3 hours on a Sunday night from 9 p.m. to midnight, that's a one-time violation, but it's over and done with. They shouldn't be able to get away with it, to be able to do that continually, these one-off kind of quality of life issues that keep coming up time and time again. Similar to our comments on the B&B local law, we suggest that the board consider an initial shorter term of a special permit, maybe 2 years, see if it works, and then if they are a good special permit receiver, maybe the next time they come up before you, it's 5 years. But to curtail that initial term, just to see if it works, certainly and very specifically for single-family residential areas. Obviously, our comments are more slanted towards Villa Nuits, not trying to impact the other property owners that could benefit from this type of law. The other thing that was unclear is, are you requiring the applicant to have an ownership interest in the property? Could Villa Nuits lease out or have some type of arrangement with a third party, maybe a not-for-profit, and have them come in and apply for and seek the special permit and essentially operate it as a commercial entity? It's not clear. We suggest that you require that the applicant have some type of ownership interest, maybe even a certain type, that they are a resident on the property. Minimum setbacks. There was a provision that was struck out, and there were some minimum setbacks in that provision. A lot of the other language in that provision were taken up and addressed elsewhere, but I do think that a 25 or 30-foot rear yard setback makes sense for a single-family residential district if that property is being used as a single-family home. But if it's going to be used as a museum or having more traffic or other types of more intense uses, the setback should be greater. So I think there should be some discretion given to the Board of Trustees in establishing what that setback is, but I think there needs to be minimums. Something that was discussed earlier amongst the board members was what is the impact with your local landmark law, even your home occupation law, and what cumulative impacts could that have? You don't know yet, they're new, but have you considered it? Could a property owner come in, take advantage of the local landmark status, go through the process, and then pretty quickly get the benefit of coming in for a special permit to change their house into a historical museum or that type of thing? I just don't know if there's even a list of properties in Irvington right now that could qualify for this special permit, or, and if there is, it'd be great to see it, but we don't know what the breadth of impact this local law could have.
There's only three on the
There's
national.
only three.
There's only
Bill,
three.
Octagon House, Villalobos, and Villanouille.
Okay. The other thing, and this might just be a clarification in the law if necessary, but throughout the law it talks about adaptive reuse of historical buildings. Those exist, but it also keeps referring to proposed structures. My assumption is that if it's not yet existing, it's not arguably historic. But my concern is Villanouille comes in, asks for a special permit, they have a lot of property. Can they build new buildings and then benefit from that special use? Could they build another kitchen, dining room, restaurant area and have that considered part of the special use permit? And the way it's worded right now, it talks about proposed buildings, and I don't know if that's the intention of the board. We hope it's not, but it just needs to be clarified. Something very specific is the ability to have a kitchen as part of the special use permit. And I think for Villanouille, and for Apollo, that's a very significant potential use. It's one thing to have a 6 or 8 chair little coffee shop as part of a museum. It's very different if you have catering facilities. So the term kitchen, we're not sure if the intention was to allow full-scale restaurant service or something much less than that. Again, APOA is concerned that that type of use could explode the residential neighborhood feel. So to sum up actually what my colleague Joel said is that there's a plethora of uses that are permitted now by this law, and we are asking this board to take very careful consideration of what that type of use could do to a neighborhood like where APOA residents live, because right now what they see is not acceptable. And the concern is that although these historical, educational, and cultural uses don't necessarily include VRBO and B&B type uses, but the impacts could be very well the same. So we implore you to take a close and hard look at that.
Without me addressing any of the specific things, I'll say that to me the ultimate control is as special permit. So I got to say, you know, if someone came in and they had been a bad actor for the last however much time, almost whatever the proposal was, I would imagine, and I also think that we're going to hear from residents, which I think is the great part of the special permit process, is that we would be able to address a lot of those issues. So to me, if you have a kitchen that's, you know, that's going to be obvious for commercial use as part of it, I think that'll be immediately brought up. You know, so I think it's, you know, it's rather than trying to make kind of every single, I mean, yes, maybe in 20 years someone will remember the history, but I'm guessing that the residents will still be upset about it. And I think that's, to me, the best thing about a special permit is that it's very controllable. If this was just going to be as a right use, I think I would share a lot of your concerns, or a lot more of your concerns, because, you know, I think so much of it is, you know.
Yeah, but the main thing, Brian, is it's really limited to historical, and, I mean, there are those other things that are in there, the gift shop, the kitchen space, but you can't have a gift shop unless the thing is a historical, educational, and/or cultural facility. I don't think a catering hall would fit, would be a historical, educational, and cultural facility. So that's not really an issue. But you're right, though. You have a lot of control over the special permit, and I think that would go to the, without putting the terms of the special permit, I don't see how you could put it in the law, because it depends what the use is. But I certainly think that might be one of the conditions of the special permit is the number of years. That's happened with Mercy, where sometimes it's 3 years. There were some issues with it, and then it was a smaller period. Then I think, then if there isn't problems, then it might be a 10-year. But I think that would be, the term of the special permit would be considered when you're deciding on the special permit. In terms of violations, code violations, this does say it has to comply with the building code. And our board, none of the boards in the village would consider any applications where there's outstanding violations. Before the board, you have to clean it up before you can even come before any of the boards. The setbacks, there were no setbacks crossed out. The setbacks apply to museums and stuff, and it doesn't make sense to have setbacks in this law because it's for an existing house. So, wherever it is. Let's say, for instance, Villa Luaro, I don't know whether it meets the front yard setback or not, but even if it didn't meet this front yard setback, it could have it because you're actively using it. So the setbacks, so nothing was crossed off about setbacks.
I think it was just specific to Broadway, or it was a very specific, I think the concern is more.
No, you're talking about, there was some provision about some place on Broadway. That property didn't exist. That was crossed out because it was describing a piece of property that does not exist.
Okay.
And there was a reference to that.
The stone walls and that's.
Yeah. That was referring to that use that didn't exist, so it didn't make sense for that to be in there. That's why
I think
that was crossed
some
out.
of the concern, I can go back up there if you want, is if
Well, had I seen the letter ahead of time, it might have been helpful.
and
Could have,
that's, and
addressed it.
I will get that to you over email as well. But I think some of the concern is if you're now going to have a lot more on-site parking and traffic, and what are the setbacks? I get it, the building's the building, you're not going to move that.
Right.
But if there's other ancillary uses or impacts that could be mitigated by having some more restrictive setbacks.
Yeah, but the
or
building's
screening
there, so
or-
the setback doesn't make sense. But I would think that a really important consideration of the Board of Trustees would be the parking situation and the traffic situation. I can see
That's why we
almost
added it
being
as a
critical.
section.
A section and that which wasn't in the law right now, and also made it flexible, again, not a certain number of parking spaces, they just review it holistically and make sure that it won't have any impact.
And I think that there's three specific, residences that this applies to, and I think each one of them has a unique situation with parking. So I think that's why we put it in there. It's always a huge concern because they are in residential areas. Even the one on Broadway doesn't have a ton of parking, and that can quickly screw things up, which we heard about when they had an estate sale there recently, and people were parking in other people's driveways, and so I think that's a concern, globally, completely, and on all three. So I think that was something that we didn't want to make requirements because frankly, each one is unique and, if something else comes, becomes historic, I'm sure that's going to have unique challenges as well, so.
So the buildings are unique and also the uses are unique. I mean, it may be that they're, only having 6 people once a month or something. I don't know. You don't know what the uses are. So it has to be case by case, and this law gives the flexibility for that.
Sure, no, absolutely, the framework is there, we're just.
I mean, a lot of it does rely on the Board of Trustees kind of being responsive to the residents that have concerns.
Right.
That's the biggest issue, and I understand that. We're obviously very aware of the current history, and I'm guessing that for the next however many years we'll also be aware of it. But I think that's obviously the key, and I think that I read this law with that kind of lens of yes, this board is very aware of the history of all three. It's interesting because we have 3. We have kind of one good actor, one bad actor, and then an unknown. So it's kind of, we have, I think, all three different types of uses right now. But so I think that I said, well, let's just say that all five of us, run off to Georgia. I don't know after Georgia, and there's a brand new board. What's that?
The country or the state?
Either one. Maybe split the split. But would this, would they, would there be protections in place? And I think the short answer for me was yes, because there's notice and all those types of things. So it wouldn't be like they didn't know about a bad actor. I think it's going to be, very obvious. And I'm hoping, I think again, this isn't a broad law that's anybody who wants to do this. It's pretty specific as well. I think that's both probably the great thing about it, and the hard thing about it is we have specific examples.
And the public hearing requirement, I think would get to a lot of what you're concerned about. And in fact, if I don't know if you were involved in that, well, Nicholas was in the public hearings on Mercy. The neighbors came when there were pretty serious problems with students coming to and from. People made it known at the public hearing. It all came out, and the board really dealt with it, pretty effectively, I think. So anyway, there's the opportunity for those issues to be raised.
The only case that we may counter to that is, well, we shouldn't have to, fight to keep our neighborhood the way it is. And I think what the other side of that coin is, we have these, three wonderful, buildings that we want to help preserve. So that's how we've kind of balanced those two things. That we want to have an octagon house here for the next 200 years, and That's the beginning. I mean, yes, it'd be great if, Apollo never had to hire an attorney to come, look out for their interests. But I think that the other side of the coin is we'd like to see these things preserved as well, so.
There was a point, maybe you were going to get to it, Mary Ann, but you brought up the proposed, the term proposed structure. I think that always means in this, as I read it, the applicant is, that proposed application, not some newly built structure.
Well, no, there could be, on the adaptive, it happens that adaptive reuse, you're dealing with an existing structure, but it could be that this person who wants to build the, whether it's the Facebook Museum or the Carburetor Museum, builds it in a new house, and that's a proposed structure, and this proposed structure holds all the carburetors, so there could be. So we're looking at those general, not all of those general standards, and not all of the language in the general standards applies
just to this one, right? But for the adaptive reuse, like in
there's membership clause, and the other special purposes.
But definitely a historic home already exists. Yes. And the other thing I think you were referencing, and you're talking about the kitchen, I was just rereading. Accessory to that space, the gift shop, the kitchen, the office space, accessory to the historic, educational, or cultural use. It's not the main thing.
I guess one thing that does concern me, and this is just abstract, well, I was going to say abstractly from this, but the specifics of the ongoing violations and I'm concerned about just if it's only detected by going back and reading the postings, the feedback on the listings. Is that because it's not interfering, externally? I mean, it's not interfering in the neighborhood, and people don't know about it unless they see it and go and read the listings and then see what's been said? Or is there noticeable activity that's ongoing and that people are checking listings just to verify that the activity?
I would say the Sykes would say the latter. Yeah, the neighbors. They were active in trying to go ahead and compile. The Sykes were active in trying to compile some of the things that we raised to the board tonight in our letter.
They're the next door neighbors.
The what?
They're the next door neighbors.
Oh, the sites. I thought you meant SITES, like the Airbnb site.
I guess independent of this particular law that we're looking at, I'm still concerned about that kind of dangling enforcement issue. Larry, I wonder if you had any thoughts about it?
I have to get caught up with the prosecutor and the building inspector. I don't know where that is right now.
Yeah.
At this point, I don't think the prosecutor felt that they had enough first-hand evidence to bring a case. So, but
So listings on Airbnb is not a, feedback on listings isn't direct evidence, is it?
I mean, as far as I know, that's not enough for the prosecutor to bring it, but again, I can circle back and find out for sure.
Yeah, it would be good to know, I guess.
Sure.
I mean, isn't the advice always to call the police if there's a violation that you suspect? I suspect that's always good advice.
Is there a limit on the number of people that are allowed in the structure that we're talking about? The one that's having the 9 weddings? Is there a limit on the number they're allowed?
Well, there should be an occupational limit in any.
No, that's what I'm asking.
It's illegal.
I don't know what you're talking
Yeah. Weddings are usually 100 people.
It's not permitted use.
Yeah,
It's
there's no limit.
Wedding, it can be shut down. And I think to me, if that happens once, it's not, people aren't gonna come back. Like that's, so, next time there's a wedding, someone calls the police, because that's, we've said there's 0 tolerance. This is news to me that there's still things going on.
But no police reports.
Yeah, we haven't had any notice to the police about any of them, so, make sure that they call 591-8080, that's the non-emergency line, and report it, because we've been waiting to have the opportunity to crack down, so.
So to clarify, no weddings are allowed there?
That's correct. Anyone else? Okay. So what do you guys think?
Well, I mean, I was ready to move forward. I guess it's just, there are some questions brought up by a poem, but I don't know if they've been pretty well clarified by our discussion. Do we need to review these in greater detail?
I think, again, the special permit nature of it, to me, gives us a lot of control. And even, like, to me, the thing that 2-year term, but I think that we could look at that. And, something to me like the Octagon House probably doesn't need a 2-year term, so it's.
So there's flexibility that we can adjust that in each case. The number of years can depend on that particular application at that particular time. We can say, this one is 2 years.
You could say this is 2 years, or it's as long as this person is the owner. I can see different situations,
So the only thing that I heard, Brian, there were a lot of issues brought up, and I thought they were good, and most of them I felt were taken care of, and our secondary discussion makes me feel that way. The only thing that came up that we didn't talk about as a board is the ownership issue. About, and I don't know where that gets us, but the idea that you could subcontract out a museum function to a profit or non-profit organization, and after that, because I don't know where that goes. I don't know if that's.
When I was thinking about it, I think at first I said, yeah, that's interesting, but then I kind of said, does that really get you, a bad actor or a better actor? I don't know. Like, to me, it's almost, if you have specific terms, to me, it almost doesn't matter who's carrying them out. If it's, an owner or, again, if that's the only way you can, again, keep this from, subdividing or something, and you need someone to come in and professionally run it, I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing, as long as they kind of live up to the terms of the special permit, in my opinion.
I think it would mean that the terms of the permit would have to be carefully thought through if there's kind of some sort of split ownership. You have any thoughts, Marianne, on that?
No, I don't. I mean, I can imagine a situation where maybe one person owns it and they have a corporation running it. I mean, they own the house and there's a corporation running it. Makes a lot of sense.
Well, it happens.
Or almost, I can see it somewhat the other way, like they need to raise capital to make improvements, so they sell a partial ownership of it or a right to it or something like that.
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking about a nonprofit corporation running something, but yeah, sure.
Or even
Mayor Smith, wouldn't that go ahead and completely change the dynamics of a residential neighborhood if you went ahead and sublet
To me-
your property
to me,
to a third-party commercial operator?
It completely depends on how you use it.
Flies in the face.
If it's, to me, it's, I'm off, the booking piece of it is all off, I gave it to I think the answer is it depends. If it's, completely if you change it into a complete corporate entity that's just gonna just be running something in a residential neighborhood, then yes. But to me, if no one knows that it's even going on because they don't have any parking and they don't, they use it once every 3 months for 2 hours on a Saturday, I think again, it depends. I think on the face of it, it feels like it might change it, but how many people own houses in LLCs anyway? To me, it's, my boss who's super wealthy doesn't own anything in his name, it's all owned by a corporation. It doesn't necessarily change the feel of the neighborhood if it's owned by, whatever his name of his company is that owns it. So I think the answer is it depends.
But here, I mean, you're dealing with existing structures, at least with Villanuiz, in a residential neighborhood. I think if the goal was to simply allow that owner to make more money, if they're to keep the historic structure as such, not subdividing it, but also you have to balance that with the neighborhood's interests and keeping the neighborhood a neighborhood. So to have as a special permit to come in and require that owner to either live on the property or have a property interest in the operation of it, I think that might make some sense. You don't want to have these little pockets of commercial development through your residential neighborhoods.
I guess if I play that out further, let's say that I'm doing REITs and I sell it to someone, I don't understand his interest then if he sells it to somebody else. If he has somebody run something, he might contract to have someone run it and still own 100% of it, right? To me, the actual ownership piece, I don't think gets you where you need to be in this case. So in other words, if I say, I want to run a great museum, I don't know anything about it, but I know a guy who now has a consulting firm that used to work at MoMA and he's going to come in and run it. So I'm going to turn all the operations over to him, but I'm still going to own it. That's one way. I mean, because how would I sell it and then still, live there or whatever?
Just the last comment, Mayor Smith, it just seems like the ancillary use is going ahead and becoming the main use when you go ahead and engage in large-scale commercial operation as someone to go ahead and run it. It seems like the tail is wagging the dog.
But I think that is a possibility under this law, that it might not be a residential home anymore. I think that's a very real possibility, that it's not just a residential home. I think is the use acceptable to the neighbors? I think that's the question.
It isn't necessarily an ancillary use.
It might be the main use. It could become the main use.
It could be the main use, but it says it may be in addition to the residential use. That doesn't mean the owner has to live there.
Sorry, the other museum law, you couldn't live there, so it was kind of the opposite.
So I tend to agree with you that, the examples you're giving about the owner being that it could be an LLC, it could be no less dangerous. I don't see the danger. And also it could be
the operation is how is it operated?
How is it done? How long is it's a 2-month, you do it for 2 months or 6 months.
And I think some ways, you can make the case that a professional operator might run it better than a novice operator.
I think there's another comment wishing to be made. You have to come up.
Okay. Hi. Kate Kroll, 14 North Buckout. I actually came here to talk about parking again, but having paid attention to this, I have actually a question about it, because it didn't become clear to me that the ancillary use may actually become the main use. Would that change the tax status? And if so, how would that affect the tax burden on the Village of Irvington and the residents as someone who's had her taxes go up 100% recently?
The answer is also it depends.
Yeah, it would be a concern, I'm sure, to residents if something was no longer taxed, they would be tax exempt as a nonprofit or have nonprofit status.
And we have that happen all the time in
And they
different homes.
could be now.
Yeah.
It could be now. They could switch to a museum or an educational institution. Those are all permitted.
Okay, so that's just, but an educational facility could be a for-profit educational facility.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be nonprofit.
Yeah, but it is true that
Again, the answer is it depends.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Can I just comment that it's loud and clear that your concerns are based on experience you're having now that includes a lack of enforcement of existing regulations. And we're doing what we can, but it's, it's hard to intervene when something is spotted on Facebook, when there's, or Airbnb, when there's nothing that actually disrupts the neighborhood or whatever. So we've done what we can. This is we're deliberately making this so tough so that we can control, we will have much more say, much more oversight into the proposed use. You can't stop somebody from posting on Airbnb. We can try and enforce once we know that there's a violation, but that's a whole different kind of thing. This is such a specific, carved out, defined use, and that we will have so much opportunity to review every aspect of it, that I think we're all saying you can be somewhat assured, this is not a perfect world, but somewhat assured that this will not be more of the same, or just something that just takes off with nobody driving the car. But I'm sure that's fairly cold comfort right now, but we are, I get it. But I also don't want to be in a position of holding something up which clearly has tremendous benefit for historic preservation and for the wider community who may have an opportunity to avail themselves of these sites because of the phrase that's been used before, because of one bad actor. We have to be very, very clear and careful and mindful that there could be more than one bad actor, but we are balancing, as usual, the positives of this kind of regulation in this village.
Right, can I just say one other thing? And I think you guys understand that the use that's being carried on there now would not be permitted under this.
Right.
Okay, it's going on, that's another set of issues, but that use would not be permitted under this law.
Mr. Lombardi, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, going back to the ownership question, I think Mayor Smith is correct in the sense that you have the opportunity on a case-by-case basis. And we look at corporation, but it could be a family trust that owns it. And they would have the same responsibility and demands, and that would be a different circumstance. Thank you.
Nick, did you have something else?
Mayor Smith, I guess the single sentence would be, we're just concerned that we think that a POA has presented this board time and time evidence of a flagrant misuse. It seems to be perpetuating, and we can't stop it. We are so worried that that's going to happen going forward with this new regulation that you're proposing.
I could say that while I'm on this board, which I guess I only have 1 year left, by election laws, I would not vote for that person's special permit. So
thank you.
That might be warm comfort, and I probably can get in trouble for saying that without hearing any proposals. But I'm so fed up that I'm willing to publicly say that. I actually think it would be pretty arrogant for him to come in here with a special permit. But whatever.
But not unanticipated.
No, not no. Because I've been surprised so many times that I'm no longer surprised. So.
But even his C of O right now, I get it. Going back and seeing that a wedding took place this past weekend, and then seeing why all the traffic was there is of little help.
I'll personally follow up with the prosecutor and find out what kind of evidence they need and make sure that we get it. Because I got to tell you that when this comes up in public meetings is usually where we find out about these things. It makes us look foolish over and over and over and over again. And I can't tell you how, I don't usually get angry when I'm sitting up here, even when people are yelling at me and calling me bad names. This makes me so angry that I can barely sit here and speak calmly about it because I just can't believe it, that it keeps going on. So I will personally look into why we have been unable to do anything about it. Because to me, I also keep thinking, all right, well, this person now has new legislation pending. They're going to be on their best behavior and not do anything for a while. Again, shame on me because it's the 700th time that I've been around. So
But this is a good law, and it's a strict
And
law.
honestly, I think one thing we
It helped.
can thank him for is that we've overthought this, I think. We thought about this a lot more than we otherwise would have, because I think we have another example sitting behind you where it's someone that is doing all the right things and wants to do the right things, which we would have said, oh, that's the model. We don't have to do a lot of these make sure we have all the stop gaps. And I think at the end of the day, having it as a special permit, we have the control over it. So I think that's the short answer for me in this particular law. The other stuff, as I said, I'm pretty angry, so.
Thank you.
So what is our thinking about moving ahead and voting on this proposed law? Are there changes that we need to make that were substantive with any of those little typos or anything
No,
that
those
does?
typos don't change.
Vehicle and traffic law?
Yeah.
Like the traffic law thing?
I mean, we can just say what they are now. If you're ready to vote on it now, just say what they are and vote on it.
I mean, I actually think I think we're ready to vote.
I'm ready.
I think we're ready to vote.
Yes, I agree.
So I will make a motion to close the public hearing. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Did you want to read the changes?
Yeah. In the opening paragraph, it'll be chapter 224 zoning rather than 213 vehicle and traffic. In section 1, paragraph C, the second line is in accordance with 224-8 E and F. Page 4, in subparagraph 5, the reviewing board may require the special permits be periodically renewed, and then go down 5 lines, that such conditions as may have been prescribed by the reviewing board. Reviewing the other twice. In paragraph 6 on the next page, reviewing is added in the first line, the reviewing board, and then 2, 4, 6, 7, 8 lines, no, 7 lines down, in undeveloped areas and subject to the same guarantees by reviewing board. Page 8, section 3, paragraph 3, second line, in accordance with 224-8 E and F. Next page, section 4, B1, in accordance with 224-8 E and F. It's right enough, and that's it.
Great. I was going to look for an old resolution.
It's just a
Just to resolve.
motion to adopt local law amending the zoning code to permit the adaptive reuse of historic buildings by special permit as corrected.
That's corrected.
Yeah.
As correct.
All right, I'll make a motion to approve a local law to permit the adaptive reuse of historic buildings by special permit as corrected. Have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you all for your input, as always. Continue public hearing to consider local laws pertaining to downtown parking regulations.
Can I just say that on this one, I was a little surprised we have such substantive feedback. I know that it's a problem.
Thank you.
Can you not hear?
How are you?
What? Can you not hear me? Oh, not what? Sorry. About parking.
Oh, gosh.
We're on parking now. I just thought that, I was a little surprised that, I thought maybe we should have had a note or something, but I'm surprised because we have a lot of substantive things to talk about now. The last public input session gave us a lot of stuff to think about. So I'm just hoping that we were,
This was only
we don't waste a lot of time. Yeah, this is a placeholder, right?
Wait, I can't hear with all the people.
You'll never lose me until this issue's over.
I went upstairs.
Here's a remote control. You can use it.
Seriously?
You want to go chase the batteries.
Yeah, can I?
You can come sit with us.
Oh, good. I can tell you what my stuff is.
I'm sorry?
Get up and teach tomorrow morning.
It's a-
I don't quite
It's
understand what
continuing.
Mark's point is. It's my bedtime, I'm up early.
I didn't think we were voting on this one tonight.
No, I-
There's too much
Yeah,
work.
okay, so that,
Yeah.
maybe that's what.
Yeah, I think we have some discussion.
Yes.
We have a lot of discussion.
No, go in the police department door.
Okay.
And.
Immediate left.
It's a restaurant. Sorry.
No,
Yeah. No, it's a restaurant, so it's not, it's a one user at a time.
Yeah, you don't have to go all the way in.
Brenda's going with
Brenda
you,
will help you.
okay. Okay.
You're staying, right?
Bring us up to date. All right.
We're continuing the public hearing to consider local laws pertaining to downtown parking regulations. That includes limited parking, municipal parking, resident parking permits, and double parking. Really? Double? You can't.
So just to clarify, since I did hear a question, this public hearing was open at the last meeting, and there absolutely were substantive comments. The hearing was kept open in order to gather any additional comments, but the board is going to need to schedule some time at an upcoming meeting to go through the comments that were received. I don't even have a list of all the comments with me here tonight. But you'll need to spend some time and go through that. So there's no plan for, making changes tonight or any sort of adoption of this.
No, to me, my understanding, I actually thought we'd have more people here tonight talking about parking.
I tried.
I appreciate it.
I tried to
appreciate your
bring,
dedication.
yeah, and I'm once again here to represent Buckeye.
You should get a placard. You both should get placards for your cars.
Oh. We have two.
So, yeah, we'd be happy to hear from either of you if you.
Yeah. No. Thank you. Okay. So, I had said, well, okay, do I have to say it again?
Yeah.
No, okay. Thank you. And so, I wanted to add to my comments from before based on something that happened the day after the last meeting, which was kind of ironic. And Mayor Smith, I sent you an email, but I have no idea whether, I don't know the process for that, like whether you respond back or whether you.
Typically, I try to respond back.
Well, it was the holiday, so I understand, and also after the snowstorm. So it was rather ironic. So we had this, what I thought was a really good meeting and a lot of different perspectives on the issue. And so I happened to have been going in late to work, so a little atypical for me on a Tuesday morning. I typically, tomorrow, will be up early and teaching. But so I saw the parking, I was up a little bit later, I saw the parking car come down. Tuesday's an alternate side parking day. There were a lot of cars parked on the side of the street where they shouldn't have been, and the brand new car drove down, and I was like, yes, I see some enforcement. And the car went down the end of the street and turned and maybe went around and disappeared. And so I waited a little bit and it was like nothing. And then when I came back from work, the cars that had been parked on the wrong side were still there. There were double parked, triple parked, all over violations.
Which street is this again?
North Buckout. No tickets. And I would like to, so to me that was like, well, that is so typical of my life on Buckout Street. And I did hear other people speak about the lack of enforcement, so that's specifically what I want to address. When I first moved here, there was regular enforcement. I had young children. I was running out and moving the car. My fear was I was going to get a ticket. The issue now is the complete opposite. There is, to my thinking, and I think this was, I heard those comments echoed at the last meeting, there is no enforcement on the side streets. It's very, very rare. Occasionally, there's some chalking, not necessarily follow-up tickets. Occasionally tickets, once we send letters in, we've sent at least 2, perhaps 3 letters to the chief of police. We have tried to do the right thing, follow the protocol, let him know. The first response we had was, I don't know what you're talking about, there's enforcement. And so we had to write again, no, there's not enforcement. I call, sometimes, they know my name when I call the police department. After a call or a letter, occasionally we'll see a tiny uptick, which might mean somebody comes through and enforces and there's a ticket once on a few windshields. And then again, it's weeks before we see any enforcement. So my thinking is, and I would urge the board, I really appreciate what you're trying to do. It's a hard problem grappling with parking in the village. I understand that one of your goals, and I think it's a absolutely fair and a fine goal, is turnover. We don't really know what turnover would be like if in fact the rules we had were currently enforced. So my suggestion is before you begin to tinker with 2 hours here, 4 hours there, whatever, let's enforce what we have, see if that has any impact on turnover, because I can tell you, it's an open secret. You can park anywhere in Irvington and not get a ticket, except on Main Street. And I don't know why that is. It didn't used to be that way. That is how it is now. Friends of mine will say to me, God, it's like wonderful. I can park on your street all day. I can go into work. And, I'm like, that's not wonderful for the residents. But again, it's a mystery to me why we don't have enforcement. But until we control for that variable, I don't believe it makes any sense whatsoever to begin to change things to see where we actually may have more turnover if people were ticketed and took that into consideration and moved their cars.
I have two quick thoughts. One, I must be the unluckiest man in the world because I got an alternate side of the street parking on North Buckout. It was the second spot in off of Main Street, maybe, so maybe that's why.
It couldn't have been
two
Tuesdays ago.
No, this was like last August. So
Oh.
I haven't parked there since.
I'm telling you, last August sounds about right. About once every year and a half,
So-
we have a ticket.
So part two I thought I was going to push this through after the change of laws is there's actually technology now that makes it very easy. It's the license plate readers. And
You
Buckout-
mentioned that at the last meeting,
Buckout would
yeah.
be the absolute perfect one because the side streets would be tougher because you have to go down and back. Buckout, you just drive around. It would be absolutely simple because it literally drives through and then it just says that license plate was here in the same spot, 2 hours and 15 minutes ago. So I think that
And you can then, you don't have to come back, you can
You just-
issue the ticket.
It'll literally have your little thing where you hit a button, you put it on the company.
Yeah.
So it's not chalking, because again, the chalking for 6-hour spots especially is you have to do it first thing in the morning, and then you can come back. But if something happens, like someone gets, the crossing guard wasn't there, so you gotta go cross traffic, you can't get there till 11.
Right.
Now you missed it, and it's, because I remember we were talking about that when we were looking at the Ardsley on Hudson train station. Well, it was like, well, if we're going to enforce that, then we can't do Main Street. And it was like, okay. So I think technology will be a big.
Well, when you mentioned that at the last meeting, I thought, why don't you do that first? That's amazing, because perhaps, if the implementation is, for whatever reason, become much more challenging, then that's great. That's an easy thing to, not easy, I don't know what it costs, I don't know what it is to implement it, but at least that's enforcement, which I think is fair and appropriate.
Yeah, and I think it just makes it so much, it takes kind of a lot of the manpower out of it, or it's just,
In theory, I agree. But what I understand from looking at this over the years is that the signage is often not accurate now.
That was my case.
And it's also because parts of the code say one thing and parts of the code say another. So there are inconsistencies. If you start reading that whole chapter on parking regulations, you can see an exact opposite rule on the same street.
Which is why we have to kind of do it all at once.
Right, so that by
Because if we're
saying,
enforcing conflicting, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But if we're enforcing conflicting regulations, that doesn't make sense.
But they can't be conflicting all over the village. You could take the ones first that are, I don't really know.
I ask you to try to go ahead and start reading it, Kate, you will.
Okay.
you'll find
Well, I know on
it
Buckout, it'll
amazing.
say 15-minute parking in front of
Yeah.
the post, which a lot of it is eroded by the weather, and those of us who've lived there a long
Not just
time.
but I don't mean,
Yeah.
not just the signage, but what is in the code that is true for parking on, say, South Ferris Street. One part, says one thing, and another part says the exact opposite. So the prosecutors, the police, what do they follow? What is the regulation?
Right.
Is not that clear. So that's the only, I'm not saying this can't happen, I'm just saying that's another little caveat that has been a giant headache to try to solve this.
And signage is another big issue.
And
with that.
signage,
And then we
once
kind
we-
of said, well, why are we going to replace all the signs?
right,
We're
when
making
it's-
changes to it. So it's like, I guess it's a bit of a chicken
All
and
of
egg.
which makes, I mean, I'm sympathetic to, as I said, it's complicated, and I appreciate that the headache it's causing you, but I also.
You had it too.
Well,
Yes.
it's, yes, and also at least on, where, on North Buckout, it's 6-hour parking, it's clear. There is some parking along that is restricted on the Tiffany estate
The 2 hours.
overnight.
Oh, okay.
Well, no, that's also 6, it's 2 right down, but
Down by the mountain.
I've got it memorized. It's 2 right down by the, right by, but also there's overnight from Thursday to Friday morning. You're not supposed to park along the Tiffany estate,
But again, I don't know if that's the case on that one, but that might be what seems to be in place right now, but there could be a part of the code that's contradictory to that. That's also describing that street with a different regulation, but it's just not.
I can tell you that when I first moved here, and I've been here, 24 years, 25 years, there seemed to be no problem and no contradictory, indication of what deserved a ticket on North Buckout. And tickets were issued probably daily, and it was what it was. And then,
But you could argue your ticket and say, hey, look at I'm reading the code here. It says in the code, I'm allowed to park this, okay, throw that ticket out. So it's a bit of an academic issue, but it did come, we had people who came and discussed that. It says here this, it says here this, you can't give me a ticket because, so it's a jumble. But maybe
This is
we
a
do this.
process.
Thank you for this.
There's no question we need
Yeah.
more enforcement.
Well, I will say one thing, Kate. I actually, about a month and a half ago, witnessed the same thing. I was going to the post office early and wanted to get there right when it opened up. And I don't know what time, but it was right when the alternate side, 15 minutes ahead of time. And I saw
Tuesdays and Thursday morning, yeah.
Yeah, and I saw the traffic guy go down the block, and there were a number
Disappear.
of cars that were obviously parked, there were a couple of people, there was 1 or 2 cars with people sitting in them, but there was a number of the ones that were obviously unoccupied that were, so I've seen the same thing
Yeah.
recently.
Yeah, no, it is a daily struggle at this point. And of course, that's our fear, ongoing. Without enforcement, the whole thing is a disaster. And but thank you. I don't
So
mean
that
to
issue of
monopolize this
6 or
whole
2
issue.
hours is
Yeah.
still, kind of academic, because who knows?
Anyhow.
Well, stay tuned.
Yeah, stay tuned. Thank you
Right.
so much, all right.
Right.
You're up.
Thank you. Okay. I do not envy you guys at all.
And I'll try to make some sense. Elaine Cardia, I am seeing both sides of the picture here. I'm a resident in Irvington on Ecker Street, and I'm also a landlord of both commercial and residential properties. Last week, one of your closing arguments, which was where I was thinking with respect to the employers being given 2 permits. I have probably one of the worst offenders as a tenant in my building, commercial, electrician, large trucks, a lot of complaints over time. And I know he's tried to get parking in the lots. His employers come in at 7 o'clock in the morning, they move the truck out, put in their car. I'm concerned from a landlord's point of view when you talked about how, 15, 20 years ago, there were a lot of empty stores in Irvington. Now we have full capacity. I have full capacity. If the laws tighten up on employers with and I have very little retail, I could start to lose valuable tenants. The real estate agent, Ken Bernstein is one of my tenants. He's already expressed concern. So I just wanted to put it out there. I get it. I have tenants that have to park. I have to park. I also see on my street a village employee brings their truck and parks it on my street overnight. I don't get why that is allowed. We're a small village, walking distance to the yard. So, I see both sides, I don't envy you, and the math doesn't work in town. There's too many cars and there's not enough spaces, so,
But don't
I
get the
don't.
landlords is your message.
Yeah, and that's my big concern, so.
Right.
Thank you.
Very good.
Well, we are glad to finally hear from the landlord.
Right, yeah. The,
Thank you for waiting this whole time.
No problem, I'm used to sitting in.
I was gonna say,
as
this
you know.
is basically,
This
this
is
is early, yeah, exactly.
But I don't know how much, I did watch the meeting that I missed, and I'm sorry I didn't.
And
Thank you.
this is the
Yeah.
issue you're probably the most passionate, or you're the most
Well,
passionate.
yes, besides
about.
historic things, it's the puzzle of it, and the very real needs of so many different constituents, just as you're saying.
The unintended consequences.
Yes, and unintended consequences.
That said, I think there are some expectations that get me, which is that I think people who, speaking, is just, people who come in to operate business in other villages that I know of take care of finding a parking solution for their oversized commercial vehicles that don't necessarily involve being parked in the village they have a business in. So I think there's a little bit of I think we have to be cautious about that because, some of these vehicles really shouldn't be in the village during daylight hours and shouldn't be on the side streets at night. If we can find parking, but otherwise, in some municipal lot or some way of working it out. But otherwise, I think it's really up to those business owners to start looking at, there's a lot of parking, I hate to say it, but, there's a lot of parking along 9A, south of, between Elmsford and Ardsley and farther south that is available for, like just fenced off areas where there's, I'm not really looking at you, I'm just staring.
No, I know, I thoroughly agree.
And I know that's where people go, they go someplace like that, they find some empty lot that's chain linked and barbed wired and they rent it.
Right, and then they drop off their employee, but the problem will be then, so aside from the large, oversized, vehicles who are parking on sidewalks, because otherwise you're sticking in the middle of Main Street, which is a whole other issue of safety. Their employees now are parking their cars because they're going to get into their vehicles. Now, yes, they could be dropped off, meet there, and pick up their vehicle, I guess.
That's the thing, if you have one of those kind of external parking areas, you park your cars in when you take the trucks out for the day shift.
There's also large, oversized, personal vehicles that stick into spots. There might be a spot, but a car has now parked over the line. And I've been tempted to call the police to say, listen, there's a car taking up 2 spots now, because the one, I have a tiny car, I can usually get into most
Then
spots.
you just keep the side of it? No.
But, so that's the other type of oversight, I think, that needs to be taken into.
Well, the new law does specifically address oversized vehicles taking more than the spot indicated, in other words, too long or too wide. But it still comes down to an enforcement and a notice issue. Someone has to notice it and report it.
So Mark, isn't that discussion we've had about the commercial vehicles and the size and fitting in, that's not part of our parking local law, right? That's part of a different law that we've been discussing.
I think there was something about.
There is something about it. It has on the sides.
It's in the law now. I don't think it was one of our changes.
No, there's something, right, exactly. There's something in the law now that talks about it.
Somebody asked about it at one of the meetings, and after the meeting, I sent the section around to everybody that it was already.
And it was all part of the comprehensive plan discussion too,
No,
the
that's
commercial vehicles.
The commercial vehicles.
That's what I'm talking about, the commercial vehicles.
You're talking about 2 things.
Okay.
Commercial vehicles and the oversized. There was a limitation on the oversized.
Okay, oversized but not commercial.
One more point I was asked to bring up since I was coming and going to spend time here. Apparently, there's what appears to be a used car lot going on at the top of the hill. where he brings that the cars are parked on Broadway for extended periods of time and so on. I'm not quite sure about that.
This is at the gas station?
I think I don't know if it's the gas station or it's River City Grill. I don't know who's doing it, but apparently, and I have seen cars with for sale signs, parked on Broadway, but it was just something that somebody asked me to bring up, that if that's permissible in Irvington and, being able to use village parking for their operation.
So,
The cars are parked on parking spots?
they're on the street with for sale? Okay.
Well, I mean, can you regulate that? I mean, someone could be a resident with a for sale sign in their car.
And drive to the dry cleaners or something, I don't know. We have to look at it.
Yeah.
We have to look at it.
I mean,
we're gonna-
but there are cases where I've seen that the lot of the gas station, for instance, was being used as a used car lot, so.
That seems fine to me. I don't know, that doesn't seem so bad. Parking.
So we're going to have a session to discuss maybe a work session, and maybe if there's some encouragement that maybe, Brian, you could send out again for any further comments, we could have as much to, in hand.
Yeah.
But we have an executive session too.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then
You could always ask Ann Atchison to send us an update to her
finish it off for tonight.
plans.
It takes you about 2 weeks to finish that, yeah, work done. So I think we're just going to continue the public hearing.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for waiting it out. We appreciate your comments.
We really do.
Can I just ask again for something I once requested before?
Sure.
It's impossible to park here if you go to the doctor in the city.
Yeah.
And this past year, everything's changed. It's much worse. I always found the last spot, but now there is no last spot. What do? I did request that at least on the 6-hour parking, if you made it 5, you could get to the city, get to your doctor, wait for him, have your appointment an hour late, and get back if it ended at 5 o'clock. You can't, because you could leave a little bit later.
But
With
there's
the
so
6
little
o'clock,
enforcement anyway.
Yeah, I had to leave at 9:45 to make my appointment. So I can't get back by 6. 9:45 till I find a parking spot, if I'm lucky, or call a neighbor, or maybe the police to come get me. I'm serious. And then, so you get a train that's a half hour at least from when you've left, you're looking for parking. And then till you get to the city, then till you get to your doctor, they're not right at Grand Central.
So how does shortening that window help you? Because you need
Because-
more than 6 hours, don't you?
Yes, I'm saying make it 5.
Or how does it help you? Because then you're stuck an hour,
Because,
I'm sorry, I don't see how the numbers add up that way. Because if you're parking around 10 o'clock or 10:30 and they're all changed to 5, that means you have to be back by, what, 4:30? 3:30? 4:30? Anyways, it seems worse.
We're definitely looking at the timing issue. It's an important issue.
Because I know going into the city for doing things, business meetings and stuff, 6 hours is not enough.
I know.
Mark, stop.
That's why the tax station road went up so much.
Yeah. Shuts down spots in your house. All right, we'll keep that open. Next up is a award of contract 2018-24 for the firehouse interior project, not to be confused with the roof project. This is the water damage.
It's just
Brian, any suggestions? Because I had a situation recently. I couldn't park at home. What do you do?
Call the
Maybe
police.
there's some places I don't know about.
It's, I had the same issue. I'm lucky I could walk, but from Riverview, on the way down anyway. A taxi maybe? I don't know.
You try and get a taxi to take you.
Well, we can't solve this tonight.
Right.
It's a
Okay,
real
okay,
issue,
because I
it's an
thought-
issue faced by many people,
Yeah,
it's one
I
of the
know.
many
It's a
issues.
I'm saying it's a problem in Irvington.
Yes,
I'm
but we're
saying I,
leaving,
but
we're
it's
gonna
not just
continue
me.
this discussion.
Okay. Hopefully you'll find something that'll make it a little better.
Good shit.
Thank you. You guys are great.
Thank
And you know what? You're also smart. You see things from every direction, which is wonderful. You open up all our eyes too.
Thank you.
For what you do.
You're welcome. Have a great night.
Good night.
Larry, did you want to
give a quick,
Sure. So the interior, the upstairs interior of the firehouse was damaged from water as a result of the incorrectly done roof job last year. The, that was subtle, right? So we are in negotiations with our insurance carrier over payment. In the meantime, plans and specifications were put together and put out to bid, and we had a healthy number of bids submitted for the interior restoration. The low bid was reviewed by our architect and recommended. I think there might be a letter on your desk there just confirming that. But a good portion of the amount of the recommended award, which is the base bid plus the alternate, we expect a good portion of that to be covered by insurance, probably as much as 90% of it to be covered. So there's still, still a portion that we'll have to pay, but and plus the interior is not being put back exactly the way it was. That includes, the wood paneling and other things that have been in there that were vintage. So there are some changes to the layout and a few other things.
Saying it so.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you check with the Department of the Interior on the historic nature of
Yeah,
that?
we'll have to check on that. 1965 was a good year for construction.
Mr. Brady's workhouse or whatever.
So that's the background on this.
Very good. Whereas 10 bids, anyone have any questions?
No.
Whereas 10 bids were received, which is great, we got 10, for contract 2018-24 for the firehouse interior project as follows below. Whereas the village wishes to award both the base bid and alternate number 1. And whereas the village administrator reviewed the bids submitted and determined that the lowest bidder for base bid plus alternate number 1 is in order responsive to the specifications. Now therefore be it resolved to award contract 2018-24 for the firehouse interior project in the amount of $332,200, base bid plus alternate number 1, to Pearl River Plumbing, Heating, and Electric, Inc., doing business as for 2 Cs, and the authorize the village administrator execute said contract. I'll make the motion if I can have a second. All in favor? Aye.
Now, it's not just plumbing, heating, and electric interior work, right? I mean,
No.
they can do more than that, right?
Yes.
They do expand.
With a name like that.
Yeah, it's very specific. Should we promote as a police officer?
Yeah, right.
Reports of boards, standing committees, and officers, trustee liaison reports.
I'm just going to let it ride and say nothing to report.
High five.
I will thank Brian for saying much of what I needed to say about the holiday happening.
You're welcome.
I'll echo his congratulations to the beautification committee.
They did a great
Saw
job.
how hard they worked.
Yeah.
I will just add quickly that the Community Advisory Board will meet on Tuesday, December 11th. The annual Senior Citizen Christmas Lunch is Tuesday, December 18th at 11:30. And importantly, this coming Wednesday, December 5th, is the first in a series of public meetings to allow residents to share ideas and thoughts on rules and regulations in all Irvington parks. This first meeting is the one that we would encourage anyone with any comments and thoughts about the rules to come and let us know what their feelings are. There are going to be at least 3, if not more, meetings. Hopefully, those meetings will be able to zero in on individual topics that will be determined from that first meeting.
So when you say have them come and fill us in, you don't mean us board, you mean the rec
us-
department?
Yes, the rec department.
Sorry, because I was.
And their
Don't line up here.
liaison.
Yeah.
But I would invite anyone who's interested in hearing that.
Yeah, definitely.
When is the first meeting?
This Wednesday, the
Wednesday.
5th, 7 o'clock, senior citizens.
Great.
That's it?
That's it.
I'll shorten the wonderful reports from the water and highway department, but I will mention that 11 trees were planted in the newly installed tree wells on Main Street. I'm sure people have seen those. And there was a broken curb on Mountain Road, and that was repaired. I think everybody probably knows that the water is turned off at the village parks for the winter by now. And there were some other things, of course, that went on. I will, in terms of the theater, let me just mention that on both Thursday and Friday, there are movies. One is, the Thursday movie is the Historical Society's talk about the local locations that were used in the movie,
Nobody's Fool?
what is it?
Nobody's Fool?
That's it, Nobody's Fool. Good, Larry. And the other one is Ruth Bader Ginsburg, RBG, on Friday night.
That's not this Friday.
Not this Friday.
It's not? It's the 14th. Oh, I was wrong. Okay. Okay, you were right. You were right. Okay,
I
sorry.
can't make this Friday, I think.
All right, I'm so anxious to see it. But that's, all right, sorry, that's the next one. Okay. Fire me as the liaison. That's it. Dennis?
Nothing for me tonight.
Okay.
Village Administrator's Report.
Nothing tonight.
Okay.
Village Clerk Treasurer's Report.
Nothing for tonight.
Village Attorney's Report.
Nothing.
Public comment. Review of action items.
Three items. One is following up with the prosecutor, which might be on both of our lists. The other is following up with the police chief regarding enforcement of parking. And the last is to send out a subtle reminder about getting comments on our parking plan from the mayor.
Great. I will make a motion to adjourn to an executive session regarding collective bargaining. If I can have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Happy Hanukkah, everyone.
Yeah.
That's right.